Camila had her back to the room when she heard it. "Be my wife for 6 months." She stopped. The cloth in her hand went still. She knew that voice. She had been hearing it for a year, through doors, across corridors, in the clipped instructions he passed through his assistant without ever raising it. She knew the weight of it, the control in it. She turned around slowly. He was right there. She hadn't heard him move the chair, and that unsettled her more than the words had. She'd spent 6 months on his personal floor learning the sound of his wheels on marble, the rhythm of his mornings, the particular silence he carried when something was wrong. She knew this man's patterns better than she knew most people's faces. And he was looking at her like she was the answer to something she hadn't been asked. "Excuse me," she said. He reached out and curled 2 fingers around her wrist, not rough, not soft, just certain, and turned her fully to face him. "You heard me," he said. Camila looked down at his hand on her wrist. She had never been this close to him. In a year of working his floor, his suite, his private corridor, there had always been the correct distance between them. Professional. Maintained by both sides without discussion. That distance was gone. She looked back up at him. "Sir," she said carefully. "I'm your maid." Something moved behind his eyes. "I know exactly what you are," he said. "That's why I'm asking." He released her wrist. 4 o'clock. "My office. Hear me out before you say anything." He turned the chair toward the door. Paused at the threshold without looking back. "You'll be paid for your time either way," he said. "Just for listening." Then he was gone. Camila stood in the middle of the suite and stared at the door he'd just left through. She had cleaned this room 300 times. She knew where every surface was without looking. She could do this job in her sleep. She looked down at her wrist. She finished the room. Finished the 3 after it. Did every single thing correctly and completely because that was who she was. But her mind was nowhere near the work. She had been on the 14th floor before. Deliveries, the odd errand, instructions passed through the chain of management that connected a man like Jin-woo to a woman like her. She knew the floor. She did not know the inside of his office. Now she did. It looked like him. That was the first thing she thought when his assistant showed her in and closed the door behind her. Minimal, precise, nothing that wasn't earning its place. The kind of expensive that didn't need to prove itself. She had spent a year learning this man's taste through the spaces he occupied, and this room was entirely consistent with everything she already knew. She sat down without waiting to be told. She had spent a year being told where to stand and when to speak, and she was not going to perform smallness in a chair across from a desk just because the setting was unfamiliar. Jin-woo looked up from the open folder in front of him. He noted that she'd sat without invitation. She could see him noting it. "I'll explain before you read anything," he said. "All right," she said. He told her without dressing it up. No slow approach, no careful preparation of the ground. Just the truth, laid out the way she had learned he laid everything out, cleanly, directly, with the assumption that she was capable of receiving it. Her name was Yun-sul. His family had promised him to her before either of them had a say in it. 26 years ago, 2 fathers over a dinner table, arrangement so deeply embedded in the structure of both families that it had stopped being a choice a long time ago and become simply a fact, like the company, like the building, like the name. The Yun family's capital was woven into the CO Group's foundation at the operating level. A formal broken engagement didn't just end a relationship. It triggered a restructuring clause that would fracture the business from the inside. And fracturing the business handed power directly to Cha Miho. Camila knew the name. Everyone in the building knew the name, Jin-woo's best friend since university, his business partner, the man who had appeared at the hotel twice in the months after the accident to manage things in Jin-woo's absence. She had seen him in the lobby. She had read the energy of the staff around him, the particular careful alertness that people had around men who held power adjacent to the person they actually worked for. Jin-woo told her what Miho had done. Quietly. Without letting his voice change. The months Jin-woo was in hospital. The surgeries, the recovery, the long brutal work of rehabilitation. And Miho, during those same months, had found his way into Yun-sul's bed. Not once. Repeatedly. A choice made over and over while Jin-woo was learning to move his hands again. The office was very quiet. Camila said nothing. There was nothing to say. She just let him finish. I found out 3 months ago, Jin-woo said. I haven't moved on it because moving on it the wrong way destroys everything my father built. The only exit that doesn't cost me the company is if Yun-sul ends the engagement herself. He paused. She won't do that unless she believes there's nothing left to come back to. Camila understood immediately. You need her to see that you've moved on. Not just moved on, he said. Replaced her. With someone real enough that fighting for me becomes pointless. His eyes stayed on hers. Yun-sul doesn't respond to rumor or suggestion. She'll pull at anything uncertain until it unravels. I need her to look at my life and find nothing to pull at. He pushed the folder across the desk. She picked it up and read it from the first line to the last. He waited without performing patience, without watching her face, without filling the silence with reassurance. He just waited, and she read, and she appreciated the absence of pressure more than she could have explained. 6 months. Residence in the penthouse. Public appearances as his partner, dinners, family events, whatever was required. A conduct clause and a mutual privacy agreement that protected both of them equally. Her own wing. Her own space. Her own key. And at the bottom of the page, the number. Camila kept her face still. That figure was her mother's full medical debt, 2 years of bills the insurance had refused that had been quietly hollowing out her salary every single month. It was her brother Luca's university fees, all 4 years, without her having to choose between his future and her mother's health. It was breathing room she had not had in so long she had forgotten what it felt like. She set the document down. Why me specifically, she said. Jin-woo held her gaze. Because you've been on my floor for 6 months and in that time you have heard things, seen things, and been in rooms where information was valuable, and none of it has gone anywhere. He leaned forward slightly. Because I have watched you handle situations that would have rattled most people and you didn't rattle. Not once. He paused. Yun-sul is going to study whoever is standing next to me. She will look for cracks. I need someone who doesn't have any. Camila was quiet for a moment. I want a termination clause, she said. If I choose to leave before 6 months I take everything already paid with no penalties. He picked up his pen and wrote it into the margin without negotiating. Signed beside it. Pushed it back across the desk. She looked at it. Then at him. And I won't be used against Miho, she said. I'm not reporting conversations back to you. I'm not positioning myself to gather information on either of them. I'll stand beside you and I'll be everything this contract says I'll be in public. But the moment I feel like I'm being used for something beyond what's written in that document, she held his eyes. I invoke the clause. Same day. No discussion. A long moment. Agreed, he said. She signed. He looked at the document briefly after she slid it back. Then up at her. Friday, he said. Noon. Camila stood and picked up her bag. I'll finish my morning shift first. I know, he said. As if he expected nothing less. She was at the door when something made her stop. She turned back. He was still watching her. That same expression from the suite, measuring, certain, and underneath the certainty something she couldn't name and wasn't sure she wanted to. This stays professional, she said. His expression didn't change. Of course, he said. She left. In the elevator going down she stood very still and stared at the steel doors and told herself with complete firmness that she knew this man. She had known him for a year. She knew his schedule and his silences and the way he took his coffee and the particular mood that meant his morning had gone badly. She knew him the way staff knew employers, carefully, functionally, from the correct distance. She did not know the weight of his fingers on her wrist. She did not know what to do with the fact that she could still feel it. The elevator reached the ground floor. She stepped out, straightened her uniform, and went back to work. Penthouse was the top 2 floors of the CO Grand, and Camila had cleaned it exactly 4 times before she moved into it. She knew the layout. Knew the way the morning light came through the east windows and hit the kitchen marble, knew the particular echo the living room had when it was empty. What she didn't know was how to exist inside it as something other than staff. She figured it out the same way she figured out everything, by deciding to and then doing it. Her wing was separated from his by a long corridor and 2 doors. She unpacked methodically, made the space look lived in without overdoing it, and was done before 2 in the afternoon. Jin Woo was somewhere in his wing. She could hear, very faintly, the low exchange of his voice with Kang Woo's. She did not go and introduce herself to the space. She was already familiar with it. She simply inhabited it. They ate dinner at opposite ends of a table built for more people than 2. Jin Woo briefed her on the family dinner in 9 days, who would be there, what each person's relationship to the situation was, what she needed to know and what she didn't need to perform. He spoke about it the way he spoke about everything, clean and direct, and she listened the way she listened to everything, completely. Partway through he stopped and looked at her. "You're not writing any of this down," he said. "I don't need to," she said. A pause. Then he continued. When he was done she asked 2 questions, both tactical, both precise, and he answered them without the flicker of surprise she caught him suppressing. She filed that away too. He was still recalibrating what she was. That was fine. She had time. Before he left the table he said, "Wear something you're comfortable in. Not something you think I want." Camila looked at him. "I wasn't going to ask." That almost smile again. There and gone. She cleared the table herself because some habits were structural and went to her room and did not think about the almost smile at all. The CO family dinner was held at his aunt's house, a sprawling property in the hills that announced its own importance before you were through the gate. Camila sat beside Jin Woo in the car and they did not speak for most of the drive, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which she noted and set aside. She wore deep green. Simple cut, nothing performative. She'd done her hair up and kept the jewelry minimal because she wasn't trying to be memorable, she was trying to be real. There was a difference and she understood it instinctively. The room read her the moment they came through the door. She felt it, the collective recalibration of every eye, the way conversation didn't stop but thinned slightly, the particular quality of attention that meant she was being assessed by people who were skilled at assessing without appearing to. Jin Woo's hand came to the wheel of his chair and he moved them forward and she matched his pace without being told, and that, she realized, was already part of it. The ease of moving together. The absence of awkwardness. People were watching for awkwardness. She didn't give them any. His aunt was cool and curious. His cousin was openly skeptical in a way he thought he was hiding. An older uncle smiled too warmly and asked too many questions about her family, and she answered everything pleasantly and gave away nothing that mattered. Jin Woo watched her from beside her and she felt his attention the way you felt weather changing, not intrusively, just present. She was in the middle of a conversation with 2 of his female cousins when she felt a hand close lightly around her elbow and she was steered, smoothly and with complete social grace, away from the group and toward a quieter corner near the window. Yun Sul. Up close she was even more precisely constructed than she had appeared across the room. Everything about her was intentional, the dress, the posture, the smile that arrived at exactly the right temperature. She was the kind of beautiful that had been maintained and weaponized, and she knew it completely. She looked at Camila the way someone looked at something they intended to remove. "You're not what I expected," she said. Her voice was pleasant. The pleasantness was a tool. "I get that sometimes," Camila said. Yun Sul's smile didn't move. "How long have you known Jin Woo?" "Long enough," Camila said. "He's a complicated man," Yun Sul said. "Loyal to the people he considers his. Completely unreachable to everyone else." She tilted her head slightly. I just want to make sure you understand what you're walking into. For your own sake. Camila looked at her steadily. That's very kind of you. He'll get bored, Yun-Sul said. The pleasantness dropped 1 degree. Just one, barely perceptible. Men like Jin-Woo always find their way back to what's familiar. What's known. She paused. I'm just being honest with you. Woman to woman. Camila smiled. Warm, unbothered, completely unreadable. I appreciate that, she said. Excuse me. She returned to Jin-Woo's side. He was mid-conversation with his uncle and she settled beside him naturally and he glanced at her once, quick, questioning, and she gave him nothing. Just presence. Just calm. On the drive home the city scrolled past the window and Jin-Woo let the silence sit for a few minutes before he said, What did she say to you? Camila told him. Word for word, flat effect, the way she'd repeat a weather report. She watched his jaw tighten incrementally with each sentence and when she finished he was quiet for a moment. She's threatened, he said. Yes, Camila said. And she's angry underneath the manners. She expected someone she could dismiss in 30 seconds. She looked out the window. She couldn't dismiss me and it bothered her. Jin-Woo was quiet. Then, you didn't tell me when you came back. I handled it, she said simply. Another silence. Different from the ones before. Closer somehow without either of them moving. Good, he said quietly. She looked at her hands in her lap and told herself the warmth she felt at that single word was just satisfaction at a job done well. It was mostly true. It was a Wednesday morning, early, the corridor still gray with pre-dawn light. Camila had woken before her alarm the way she always did, dressed quickly, and gone to the kitchen to make coffee before the day began. She wasn't expected anywhere until 10. She had 2 hours of quiet and she intended to use them. She was almost at the kitchen when she passed the gym door. It was open. Not wide, just enough. And through the gap she saw him. Jin-Woo was at the parallel bars on the far side of the room, standing between them, both hands gripping the rails. He was moving. Not sitting, not being assisted, not in the careful supervised way she had imagined his therapy to look, he was walking. Slow, deliberate, every step requiring the kind of concentrated effort that showed in his whole body, in the set of his shoulders and the line of his jaw and the controlled exhale he pushed out with each movement. He hadn't heard her. Camila stood at the gap in the door for 3 seconds. Long enough to understand what she was seeing. Long enough to understand what it meant that nobody else knew. Then she stepped back. Went to the kitchen. Made coffee slowly and deliberately and by the time she heard his wheels in the corridor 20 minutes later she was at the counter with a cup in her hand looking out the window as if that was all she had ever been doing. He came in. Said good morning. She said it back. She poured a second cup without being asked and set it at the counter beside her and he moved to it and they stood there in the early morning quiet and drank their coffee and neither of them said anything that mattered and she felt the weight of what she was not saying like something she was carrying very carefully so it didn't spill. She never mentioned it. Not that day or the days after. But she started adjusting things. It was small at first. A chair repositioned so it sat against a wall he could use for balance if he needed it. The rug in the main corridor rolled back so the path was clear and even. At a dinner with his business associates she quietly shifted the seating arrangement so that the distance between his chair and the standing area where the men gathered after the meal was shorter than the host had planned. She did all of it without drawing attention to the doing of it and without ever referencing why. Jin-Woo noticed. She knew he noticed because he was a man who noticed everything. But he said nothing and she said nothing and between them this unspoken thing existed, her knowing, and him knowing she knew, and both of them choosing to let it be what it was. Then one night 3 weeks into the arrangement she couldn't sleep. It happened sometimes, her mind running the numbers of her mother's treatment schedule, Luca's upcoming semester, the maintenance of everything she was managing from a distance while living in a penthouse that was not hers. She got up, wrapped herself in a cardigan, and went to the kitchen. Jin-Woo was already there. He was at the counter attempting to make tea with the focused dissatisfaction of a man who had never needed to learn how. She watched him for a moment from the doorway. "You're doing it wrong," she said. He looked up. Not startled, he didn't startle. Just looked at her in the low light of the kitchen with that steady gaze. "I know," he said. "I've always done it wrong." She crossed the kitchen, moved his cup aside, and started again. Properly this time. He watched her and didn't offer to help, and she didn't ask him to. When she set the cup in front of him, he wrapped both hands around it. She made her own, and they sat across from each other at the kitchen island in the quiet that belonged to very late nights and very early mornings, the kind of quiet that made the edges of things softer. He spoke first. He told her about the accident. Not the public version, the real one. The rain that came faster than the forecast said it would. The bend in the road that he'd driven 100 times. The way time had moved strangely, stretched and compressed at once, in the seconds between losing control and the impact. 3 surgeries. The first time he tried to move his legs and understood from the quality of the silence in the room that something had fundamentally changed. The long months of fighting back what he'd lost inch by careful inch, in private, because showing weakness in his world was an invitation he could not afford to extend. He didn't ask for anything when he told her. No comfort, no response. He just told her, the way he did everything, straight and without decoration. When he finished, Camila was quiet for a moment. Then she told him about her mother. The diagnosis that arrived on a Tuesday like a stone through glass. The way the medical bills accumulated with a logic that felt personal, targeted, designed specifically to break the kind of family that didn't have margins. The year she worked 3 jobs and still couldn't close the gap. Luca trying to defer his university place and her refusing to let him because she had not spent a year working herself to nothing so her brother could give up on himself. She didn't dress it up either. Just the facts of it, laid plain. When she finished, Jean Wu was looking at her with something in his expression that wasn't pity. She would have closed down immediately if it was pity, but something quieter. Recognition, maybe. One person who had learned how to carry weight looking at another one. They sat there until the tea went cold. "You knew," he said eventually. Not a question. She didn't pretend not to understand. 3 weeks ago, she said. "The gym." He nodded slowly. "And you said nothing." "It wasn't mine to say." He looked at his cup. "Most people would have used it." "I'm not most people," she said. "You knew that when you hired me." The silence that followed was the most comfortable silence they had shared. She felt the shape of it change, the way the silences between them had been changing gradually, less professional, more honest, the careful distance becoming something that was still careful but for different reasons now. She picked up both cups and rinsed them at the sink. "Go to sleep," she said, without turning around. "You have therapy in the morning." A long pause behind her. "Good night, Camila," he said. And something about the way he said her name in that kitchen at that hour was completely different from every other time he had said it, and she felt it move through her like something she wasn't ready to name. "Good night," she said. She heard him leave. She stood at the sink for a moment longer than necessary, hands braced against the counter, looking at nothing. 6 months, she reminded herself. She was beginning to wish she hadn't put a number on it. It didn't happen all at once. That was the thing about it, there was no single moment she could point to afterward and say that was where it changed. It was accumulative. It was the morning he brought her coffee without being asked and set it beside her without comment. It was the evening she laughed at something he said and he went quiet for a second, like the sound had caught him off guard. It was the way he had started briefing her before events differently, less like a handler preparing an asset, more like a man telling someone he trusted what to expect. It was the night of the CO Group's quarterly dinner. The event was formal, large, held in the hotel's grand ballroom 3 floors below the penthouse. Camila wore black, simple, clean, deliberate. She stood beside Jean Wu for 4 hours and held the room the way she had learned to hold rooms, and somewhere in the middle of the evening she caught him watching her from across a conversation he was having with 2 board members, and the look on his face was not the look of a man monitoring a performance. She looked away first. Yun Sul was there. She had arrived with Miho, the first time Camila had seen them together publicly, and the sight of them moving through the room with the practiced ease of two people who had rehearsed this particular performance made something tighten in Jinwoo's jaw that he controlled immediately and completely. Camila moved slightly closer to him without making it visible and felt him register it. Yun Sul pushed hard that night. Not obviously, she was too skilled for obvious. But she engineered 3 separate moments where she was close to Jinwoo without Camila, where the history between them was the heaviest thing in the air, where she said things in that warm precise voice of hers that were designed to remind him of everything they had been. Camila watched from the correct distance each time, and when Jinwoo returned to her side she asked nothing and offered nothing except presence. On the ride up in the elevator afterward neither of them spoke. The penthouse was quiet and dark except for the city light coming through the windows. Camila reached up to remove one of her earrings and the clasp stuck and she was working at it with both hands when Jinwoo said from behind her, "Let me." She went still. His hands came up to her ear. Careful, precise, the same deliberateness he brought to everything. He worked the clasp free and she felt his fingers brush the curve of her ear and the back of her neck, and then the earring was in his palm and he held it out to her and she turned around to take it and they were close. The same distance as that first morning in the suite when this had all begun, when he had reached for her wrist and the careful professional distance had ended. She looked up at him. He was looking at her the way she had been refusing to look at him for weeks, like the contract had stopped mattering a long time ago and the only question was what came next. "Camila," he said. Just her name. Just that. She closed the distance. What happened between them was nothing like the performance they had been putting on for the past 2 months. There was no audience, no strategy, no careful positioning of two people playing roles. It was just him and just her and the city spread out enormous and indifferent beyond the windows and the quiet of the penthouse wrapping around everything. He was unhurried and she was honest and neither of them pretended it was anything other than what it was. Afterward she lay beside him in the dark and the city moved outside and neither of them spoke for a long time. Then he said, "This wasn't in the contract." "No," she said. "Are you?" "I'm fine," she said. "Are you?" A pause. "Yes," he said. And then, quieter, "More than." She felt the warmth of it move through her and didn't fight it this time. She was tired of fighting things that were already true. She fell asleep with her head against his shoulder and he did not move away, and in the morning the city was gray and bright and she made coffee for 2 without thinking about it, and he came into the kitchen already dressed and took the cup she held out and their hands touched in the exchange and neither of them acknowledged it and both of them felt it. 3 days later Miho came to the hotel. Camila wasn't supposed to be in the 14th floor offices. She had come up to drop off a folder Kong Wu had asked her to deliver and she was on her way back to the elevator when she heard the voices through the closed boardroom door. She wasn't listening. She was walking. But Jinwoo's name moved through the door clearly enough that her feet slowed. Then Miho's voice, lower, conversational, with an edge beneath it like a blade laid flat. She kept walking. She did not tell Jinwoo what she had heard. She had agreed not to be his informant and she kept her agreements. But she watched Jinwoo's face at dinner that evening and saw the tension he was carrying and understood that whatever Miho had said in that room was already known. She was right. Jinwoo told her after dinner. He told her the way he always told her things, straight, without softening it, with the quiet steadiness of a man who had decided she deserved the truth without decoration. Miho had seen his face at the quarterly dinner. Had watched him watch Camila from across the room. And Miho, who had built his entire position on knowing Jinwoo better than anyone, had understood immediately that what was happening in the penthouse had moved beyond contract. He had gone to Yun Sul. Together they had constructed the play carefully. The joint business agreement between Jinwoo and Miho contained an emergency clause, a provision that allowed either partner to call for an immediate independent audit of all shared accounts if they believed the partnership's stability was at risk. An audit of that scale, triggered without warning, would freeze CO Group operations and expose every internal structure to outside scrutiny at the worst possible moment. The company, still rebuilding the ground it had lost during Jinwoo's recovery, would not survive it intact. The terms were simple. Jinwoo had 2 weeks to formally reinstate the engagement to Yun Sul. In return, Miho would not trigger the clause. Yun Sul delivered the ultimatum herself. She had come to the penthouse that afternoon while Camila was out and Jinwoo had received her alone, and Camila had returned to find the suite carrying a different quality of silence, the kind that came after something had already happened and left its shape in the air. 2 weeks, Jinwoo said. That's what she gave me. Camila was quiet. He told her the rest. The full picture of what the audit would mean, what it would expose, what it would cost. He laid it out without asking her to respond to it, just giving her the information she was owed. Then he looked at her and his voice shifted. Still controlled. But underneath the control something she recognized now, the sound of a man saying something that cost him. If you want to invoke the termination clause, he said, I'll honor it. Everything already paid, no penalties, exactly as agreed. Camila looked at him for a long moment. Do you want me to leave? She said. He said nothing. His jaw was set and his hands were still on the wheels of his chair, and he was looking at her with everything he had locked behind his eyes, and she could read it anyway because she had spent a year learning this man from a careful distance and 2 months learning him from close, and she knew what his silences meant. She knew what this one meant. Then I'm not leaving, she said. Something crossed his face. Vast and brief and quickly controlled. Camila. I'm not leaving, she said again. Quiet. Final. So let's figure out what we're going to do. She started with the document. Not because she had a plan, not yet, but because Camila had learned a long time ago that when everything felt like it was closing in, you went back to the paperwork. You went back to what was written. Feelings moved and shifted and could be manipulated, but a clause was a clause, and words on a signed document meant something fixed and real in a way that people's intentions never did. She found the joint business agreement in the folder Jinwoo kept in his study. He hadn't asked her to look. He didn't know she was looking. He had gone to bed carrying the weight of 2 weeks like a stone around his neck, and she had lain awake beside him until his breathing evened out, and then she had gotten up, wrapped herself in her cardigan, and gone to work. The agreement was long. Dense. The kind of legal language that was designed to be difficult on purpose, to require a specialist to navigate, to make ordinary people feel like the ground beneath them belonged to someone with more education. Camila read it anyway. Slowly, completely, from the first page to the last, the way she did everything. She found it on page 31. A subclause, nested inside the emergency audit provision, 4 paragraphs deep. She read it twice. Then a third time. In the event that the initiating partner can be demonstrated to have acted in deliberate contravention of the partnership's foundational interests, including but not limited to actions constituting personal betrayal, financial misconduct, or deliberate reputational harm toward the non-initiating partner, the non-initiating partner reserves the right to file a counterclaim that renders the audit trigger null and void pending independent review. Camila sat back. Miho had slept with Jinwoo's betrothed for months while Jinwoo was in hospital. There were witnesses, people at the hotel who had seen them together, staff who had been paid to be discreet but whose discretion had a price. There was a paper trail if you knew where to look, reservation records, private dining bookings, the kind of evidence that accumulated when 2 people were careless because they believed the person they were betraying was too broken to ever come looking. Personal betrayal. Deliberate reputational harm. Miho had built his trap on ground he had already poisoned. And he had not told them about this clause because he had counted on Jinwoo not finding it in time or not being willing to use it. He had miscalculated on both. Camila closed the folder. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:20 in the morning. She went back to bed, lay down beside Jinwoo in the dark, and slept better than she had in weeks. She told him in the morning. She waited until he had his coffee, until the first sharpness of waking had passed, and then she put the agreement on the counter in front of him, open to page 31, the relevant clause marked with a clean straight line. He read it. She watched his face. He read it again. Then he looked up at her, and the expression on his face was something she had never seen from him before, not the controlled steadiness, not the careful precision. Something underneath all of that. Something that had been waiting a long time to surface. You found this last night, he said. This morning, she said. 3 a.m. He looked at the page again. Then back at her. Camila. The evidence exists, she said. The hotel records, the staff who saw them together, the paper trail. It's all there. You just have to be willing to use it. She held his gaze. Miho built his leverage on what he did to you. The same thing that gave him the audacity to make this threat is the exact thing that takes it away. Jin Woo was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed the folder. And he stood up. Not reached for the wall. Not positioned himself carefully with something to hold. He simply put both hands on the counter and pushed himself upright and stood there in the kitchen in the morning light, fully, without the chair, without performance, without strategy. Just standing. Camila looked at him. He was taller than she had constructed in her mind from 2 months of knowing him at seated height. Broader. The man and the chair had become so fused in her understanding of him that standing he looked like a different version of himself. The same eyes, the same jaw, the same deliberateness, but returned to some original form. The recovery has been complete for 2 weeks, he said. His voice was steady but she could hear something in it that wasn't usually there. I was waiting. For what? She said. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the corridor that very first morning, when he had reached for her wrist and everything had changed. For the right moment to stop pretending, he said. The kitchen was very quiet. Camila looked at him standing there in the light and felt something move through her chest that she was done arguing with. Call your lawyers, she said. I'll put the evidence file together. They moved fast. Jin Woo's legal team filed the counterclaim within 48 hours. The evidence file Camila assembled was clean and thorough, hotel records cross-referenced with dates, staff statements gathered through Kang Woo with a discretion that protected everyone involved, the paper trail laid out in a sequence that was impossible to dispute. She was not a lawyer. She was a woman who had spent a year learning to pay attention and 2 months learning that attention could be weaponized for the right reasons. The counterclaim landed on Miho's lawyers' desks on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon Miho's access to the joint CO accounts was frozen pending independent review. The emergency audit clause was rendered null. His board standing, suspended. He called Jin Woo. Jin Woo did not answer. Yun Sul called twice. Jin Woo did not answer those either. The documentation went to both families on Friday. Not leaked, delivered. Formally, through legal channels, with the full weight of signed evidence behind it. Yun Sul's family received their copy at 10 in the morning and by 2 in the afternoon Camila's phone showed a news notification, a brief, carefully worded statement from the Yun family confirming that the long-standing betrothal between Yun Sul and CO Jin Woo had been dissolved by mutual agreement effective immediately. Mutual agreement. Camila read it twice and almost smiled. Yun Sul had chosen the ending that preserved the most dignity available to her, which was the only choice she had left. Her pride was the price and she paid it the way she did everything, precisely, without visible flinching, in language that gave nothing away. It was almost impressive. Almost. Miho did not get a clean exit. His name was in the documentation. His conduct was on record. The industry was not large and the people in it talked, and within a week the shape of what he had done was known by everyone who mattered. He lost the board position. He lost the account access. He lost the carefully constructed image of the loyal best friend who had held things together when Jin Woo couldn't. He had built his entire position on being trusted by the right person. And he had spent that trust on the worst possible thing. The consequences were exactly the size of the choice. The 6 months ended on a Tuesday. Camila had known the date for weeks the way she knew all her dates, precisely, without sentiment. She had a system. She had always had a system. The system said that on Tuesday she packed her bag, honored the terms of the contract that had already been honored on his side, and returned to the life she had set down 6 months ago, which was now considerably more manageable than it had been. Her mother's debt was cleared. Luca's fees were paid. She had done what she set out to do. She told herself this was clean. This was good. This was exactly the shape a well-executed plan was supposed to have. She packed on Monday night. Methodically. Everything she had brought, everything that was hers, back into the bags it had arrived in. She made the bed in her wing with the same precision she had applied to hotel beds for a year and set her key on the nightstand and stood in the doorway of the room for a moment looking at it. Then she picked up her bags and walked down the corridor. He was in the doorway of the main living room. Standing. No chair behind him, no careful positioning, just standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets looking at her the way he had looked at her since the very beginning, like she was something that had entered his calculations and permanently altered them. She stopped. They looked at each other across the length of the corridor. "The contract is done," she said. "I know," he said. "I held up my end." "You did," he said. "You held up considerably more than your end." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. Her chest was doing something she was refusing to acknowledge. "Jean Wu. I'm not good at this," he said. His voice was still steady, but underneath it was the sound she had learned to hear in kitchen at 3 in the morning, the sound of him saying something real. "I've spent a long time building things that don't require me to be good at this. Structures, agreements, systems." He paused. "You don't fit inside a structure. I've been trying to find the right framework for what this is for 2 months and there isn't one." Camila said nothing. "The contract is done," he said. "What I feel isn't." The corridor was very quiet. "Stay," he said. "Not because of an agreement. Not because of a number at the bottom of a page." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Because I want you here. Because this penthouse was a building I lived in before you and it's something else now and I don't want to go back to what it was." He paused. "Because when you found that clause at 3 in the morning you didn't wake me up to tell me. You let me sleep and you handled it and in the morning you put it in front of me like it was nothing and it was everything." Camila looked at him for a long moment. Then she set her bag down. She walked toward him and when she reached him she looked up and said, completely straight-faced, "Be my husband for 6 months." Something broke open in his face. It was the most unguarded she had ever seen him, the smile arriving full and real and completely uncontrolled, the kind of smile that had clearly not been used enough. "Just 6 months," he said. "We'll renegotiate," she said. He laughed. Low and warm and real. She had not heard him laugh like that before and she thought, with the calm certainty she applied to everything that mattered, that she intended to hear it for a very long time. He reached for her hand. Not 2 fingers around her wrist this time, her whole hand, held properly, like something he was choosing and intended to keep. She let him. "If you made it to the end of this story, you already know, this one hit different. If you're new here, welcome to Miss V, where the romance is real, the tension is everything, and nobody gets away with anything. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And if you want more Afro-Korean romance with this kind of energy, the link to the next one is right above. I'll see you there."